Hi, my name is Grace, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, I am so excited to have Moshke Palmoni on, who is the author of 7 Days for Fae. It's a middle grade contemporary novel, and I was super excited to have the chance to read it. The review is up on my blog, and it's a 5 star, so be sure to check that out. But Moshke, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Like you said, I am Moshke Palmoni. That's not what it says on this book because I thought it would be a good idea to split off my pen names for children's versus adult stories for easier finding purposes. So, 7 Days for Fae is under Lior Eisen, but I generally go by Moshke online. Um, this was a big departure from the type of thing that I usually write. I usually focus a lot on fantasy and sci fi, but it was 2020. We were in lockdown and I was dealing with college, and suddenly I wanted to write a story to get all of my feelings about growing up disabled out. And this mixture of like my own experiences and sort of wish fulfillment happened.
That's such a mood, writing a comfort book during quarantine, because that's kind of what Runaways was for me. It was something that I started during quarantine because I was like, I need to take a break from all of this epic fantasy, like sticky board on the wall outline nonsense, and just do something simple. Um, I'm really glad that you were able to write this book and that it was able to help you.
Yeah, that's the biggest mood, you know, sourdough bread and happy stories.
Hmm. Cool. So, to introduce the protagonist, Faye is an autistic 10-year-old, and you write the story in first person. So, we're seeing the world through her eyes. So, what was your favorite part of writing her point of view for a middle grade audience, and were there any parts that you found challenging?
So this sounds really mean, but I actually really enjoyed writing her having meltdowns because I have a reason here. Um, I was a super masked autistic child. I was the ideal kid that all of the teachers liked. Everyone told my parents I was so well behaved and so mature. And then I would go home and find all of my activities and expectations and everything so overwhelming that I would just scream and cry and yell at my parents and like bang my head on doors and stuff. And that's not something that you share, that you talk about. And so it was actually kind of really freeing to just write on the page, this doesn't make her a baby and this doesn't make her less of a person because this is how she has to deal with things being overwhelming. It was kind of cathartic, actually.
That's
Um,
Sorry, go ahead.
no, you go ahead. I was done with that bit.
I was just gonna say that's very wholesome, and I'm glad that you were able to direct that out.
And for the challenging parts, it was a little hard in the first draft to balance her being a mature for 10-year-old kid uh, with the fact that she is still a 10-year-old kid. Like she has this whole conversation with her aunt about how you don't have to understand someone else's point of view to respect it. And I don't think it was impossibly mature, but I did have to keep remembering that she won't react to these conversations with the same nuance or bias or jadedness that one might as an adult. I think I got there in the end, but it took a couple of passes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Writing child protagonists and writing for a child audience, because this is a middle grade book, takes a certain level of putting yourself back in the headspace of being a kid, which is hard to do when you've not been a kid for a while. But at the same
Exactly.
time, it's like you need the experience of age to be able to write a good book that can say all these things that need to be said. And that experience under your belt to be able to communicate these things in that kind of subtle way. And so it's definitely a very careful balancing act. And I think you accomplished it in a really well done way because um, transitioning into my next question, you have adult characters in the story, like Faye's parents, who are very supportive of their daughter and who like tell her that like you're special, you're not a baby, like you're different, but that doesn't make you wrong. And one of her parents is also non-binary. So would you like to talk about why you included this representation and how their parents present in the book affects the story?
Yeah, so first, it was really important to me that Faye's parents be completely supportive. They're not perfect, but they don't fall into a lot of the issues that parents of disabled children often have in fiction and real life, because I didn't have parents that just supported me and told me it was fine like that. They were accommodating in some ways, but I didn't have it in as much as I would have liked. And I wanted this story to be about Faye able to find her place in the world, not having the entire world against her. So that was very important to me. And yeah, her non-binary parent, whose name is Aspen. I don't remember if I took that out of the book or not, but either way, Z has a name. It's Aspen, and at first Z was just kind of an impulse ad, like, I'm non-binary, I want to include diversity in my books, but this is a really short story, and having one of the children also dealing with being trans might have been too much. So I gave it to a parent, and it just added a layer of complexity when Faye is in trouble and her assistant principal isn't quite sure how to react to a non-binary adult. But it ended up becoming the most important subplot of the book, because it was like, what would that be like? I didn't know that trans people existed until I was almost done with high school. What would it be like to navigate that when it's normal for you and everyone around you is still acting like it's a big deal? And the further I got, the more I realized that it was important, because I really like queer representation that isn't focused on coming out and discovering yourself. That's an important aspect of it, but it's also what most queer fiction is. And there's a lot more to everyone's life than just a coming of age type of story. And also, as an adult, Aspen represents a future. If there happens to be a trans kid who's reading this and can't imagine what their life will be like outside of school, you can get married, you can have a family if you want to, you can have a career and interests and a full life as an adult while still being queer. As scary as life is, it's not the end of the world. And that sort of fit nicely into my attempt at a wholesome message that you can be yourself and it's okay.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice reflection of Faye's arc and her parent having a similar arc being reflected in the story as well. Um, During this course of the story, their aunt Lana comes to visit with the family, um, and at first she has some issues with Aspen. I didn't realize that was the parent's name.
I
But
think I might have taken it out because one of my beta readers said it wasn't clear having Lana refer to Z as Aspen, but Z technically has a name.
that makes sense. Yeah. So, and Lana takes a little bit of an issue with Zay, partially because she doesn't know how to approach it, partially because she thinks she's being reasonable. So she's kind of antagonistic, and she also doesn't quite understand Faye, but it's clear that she loves her family and wants to communicate with them, even if she's doing it in a very misguided way. So, how do you balance this dynamic so that she doesn't come across as completely evil, but the relationship is still a challenge in the story?
So she was a lot more antagonistic and evil in the first draft, when it was just Faye needs a villain. But the more I thought about it, there are a lot of stories with evil, queerphobic, or otherwise bigoted caricatures. that that is their only trait. And there are also people in real life who seem to be almost caricatures of evil, but that's not really what I want to represent. I want to show real complex people, and nearly everyone has some amount of love and caring, no matter how bad their views. And so I balanced it by, in the book, I wrote from Faye's perspective, but for Lana's scenes in my head, I was writing from her perspective. Like when Faye overhears her arguing with Aspen, Lana is genuinely concerned about their career and family and the effect on the kids because she doesn't understand. When she gets mad at Faye for having a nonverbal shutdown, she genuinely doesn't understand how much abilities can vary and thinks that a clever and articulate kid would only stop talking out of stubbornness. And I find that in an antagonist, ignorance can be a more interesting and also more fixable um, motive than just pure hatred. I hope that made some sense.
Yeah, that made a lot of sense. I was just waiting for you to finish speaking. Yeah, and I think the antagonism out of ignorance also comes into play where Atlanta doesn't spend a lot of time around their family. She's normally out of state or out of the picture or whatever. Um, you get the implication that she's been somewhat estranged at the beginning of the book and she's only crashing here because she has to. And so she hasn't had that much exposure to them on like a day-to-day basis and she doesn't know the ins and outs of Faye's disability. So on one hand, like how would she know? But she also needs to take the effort to learn. And so I think you did a
Exactly.
really good job of like portraying that, especially as they work together. And you mentioned the one conversation earlier where like Faye talk, metaphorically like talk some sense into her, um, and I thought that was a really wholesome dynamic and a really realistic, like you said, realistic dynamic of like how these interactions go in daily life, where it's like cutting someone off completely isn't always the solution. Sometimes those people are still important to you, even if they can hurt you, and you can work it out. And so showing a hopeful and mendable way of doing that, I think, was very positive, especially for a kid's book.
Thank you.
So, my next question moves on to Faye's interactions at school. She finds companionship in Brownie, who's a loud and hyperactive new boy who comes to their school from a different district. So, how do you develop their friendship given Faye's status as like the weird loner in class?
So, Faye is the weird loner, but she's not the weird loner by choice. There's this kind of stereotype that autistic people just don't want to be around others. And that is definitely probably true for some people. And I am probably personally happier with fewer social connections than a lot of people would be. But it's also true that we often get subtly excluded until reading alone or playing alone or taking up individual hobbies is the only choice. So Faith kind of tries to convince herself that she's happier playing by herself, and she definitely convinces her parents of this. But really, she's lonely and she's desperate for some kind of connection with someone her age. And Brownie is the perfect companion for this because he is happy to talk when she doesn't. And he is compassionate and also excitable enough to just sort of make decisions when she's overwhelmed and fill her silences. And this gives her the space to get comfortable enough to take a more active role in their friendship as she realizes that she's not going to be mocked and that her decisions will be respected.
Yes, I loved all of their interactions so much. I thought that they were so adorable. And they were some of my favorite parts of the book because they really reminded me of my own friendships in real life. I have one friend who is like the most extroverty extrovert ever to extrovert, and who I've mentioned before in my social media, like I was homeschooled as a kid, and then I went to public school for the first time in high school, and so I knew nobody there. I didn't know how public school worked, and I this extrovert adopted me and was like, "Okay, you're my friend now," and like that's how I still have my closest friends to this day. So it was very wholesome reading that and being like, "Oh yeah, that's what happened to me."
Amazing.
So Faye also plays make believe games featuring her special interest in fairy tale characters. So, of course, her name is Faye, so it makes sense that she'd have a special interest in that. So, do you have a favorite legend among all of the ones that you mentioned in the story?
Okay, so this was an excuse to sneak my special interest into the story.
I
That's
might
also
have
why her name is
suspected because
Faye.
it's also my special interest. But
So,
please give us a rant.
so yes, so one, this is a little bit controversial, but I personally really like the um, autistic child, changeling child connection because as a kid, the idea that this world is loud and painful and I was meant to grow up somewhere else, but was not here with these people really resonated with me. So I enjoy that type of story. But I also just really like legends and fairy tales and especially Arthurian ones. And I'm stretching a little bit here because I didn't get specific in the story, but I do have a current favorite Arthurian tale. Is it okay if I rant a tiny bit about it?
Yes, please, absolutely.
All right. So I was reading a book full of them like a month ago, and this was in it, and I just really loved it. So, very simplistically, Arthur gets one of those quests where this guy is going to kill him if he can't do this in a year, which is very common in Arthurian fiction. And the quest is he has to find the right answer to what do all women want more than anything? And he goes back to court and is kind of pouting around, worried about how he's going to do this in a year. And Gawain says, "Hey, what's up? What's wrong?" And finally gets it out of him. Two of them decide to work together on it. And they travel all over the kingdom separately, asking every single man and woman they come across, what do women want more than anything? And they write it all down. They each fill a big book, but they don't know which is the right answer. So, like 3 weeks before the deadline, Arthur goes back to the forest where he met this guy and he meets a woman. And there's a lot more details here, but I'm going to skip over what happens with her. She wants to make a deal with him to help. And she gives him the right answer and then turns out to actually be the sister of the guy who set the quest, which I just think is really funny. Like, sure, I'll help you cheat. But the answer that they end up with is that women don't want more than anything like handsome husbands or great wealth or beauty or anything. They just kind of want to be able to do as they please. And that seems like a very simplistic answer now, but I like that it is in a story from the Middle Ages.
I love that so much. That's so funny.
I know, right?
That's absolutely delightful. Thank you so much for sharing that story with us.
Thank you for letting me.
I love that. Do you mind sharing which book of myths that was in? Because I kind of want to go find it now.
Oh, it was called something like Arthurian Legends and Tales. It was written by this one historian lady whose name I cannot remember, but I can find you later. Um, she writes a lot of these type of things. She has at least four. Two of them are British. One of them is like Viking stories, and one of so there's Arthurian, British fairy tales, Viking stories, and one other one, but they're really good, simplistic retellings while trying to keep as accurate to the various sources as possible.
That's delightful. I remember that I used to have like an old Kindle, and it was like the first piece of technology I ever owned because we lived in a very like hands-off technology household. And so mom only let me get like the free books off of the Kindle Amazon. And so I downloaded a whole bunch of classics because those were the only ones I could find for free. And I remember reading through like stacks and stacks of the Arthurian legends in the back of the car on my little Kindle when I was like in fifth grade. So
That's so sweet.
yeah, all of the Arthurian legends and like Gulliver's Travels and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, but the legends were my favorite. So, um, my last question is: do you have any advice for listeners or readers on writing an autistic protagonist? And I know this
Yeah,
advice won't be like one size fits all, but like from your experience or as
yeah,
general.
of course. There's so many ways to be autistic. I like the Sunday bar over spectrum analogy. Like it's not one person is super duper autistic and one person is barely autistic. It's here's all these traits and people have varying amounts of them and some have almost none of some of them and it's just a variety. Me personally, I want to see characters that are signaled as being autistic in more ways than just being socially awkward and having an encyclopedic knowledge of their special interest. Like both of those are autistic traits. I am socially awkward. I could tell you everything about Doctor Who. But um they aren't all encompassing. And I feel like a lot of people skip over the body language, like the way that characters stim, whether they flap or fiddle with things or however they move, when, especially when they're overwhelmed or upset or excited. Um, and the second thing is sensory sensitivity. Some people are hyposensitive and just sort of don't react to sound and touch and things. I don't personally have experience with that. So, what I like to see is when characters are hypersensitive, I still cover my ears when sirens pass. Um, and it tends to be more obvious in children characters before you learn that you should hide it. And that sort of thing. But also, an important thing to keep in mind is if you're going to show a character having a meltdown or shutdown, I think no matter what the reason, it's really important to show that they have a reason. Whether they're overwhelmed by all of the light and sound, or they're confused by what someone is asking of them, or they're just upset for some other reason, it's really, really important to show that this character is acting on their own internal logic and it is logical to their experience. It's their experience that is different from the expected.
I think those are all such really important points. And with the stimming and the body language specifically, that made me think of the different mediums that are used to tell stories because this is a book. It's textual, it's on the page. You have to show, don't tell that, but it's different than showing it in something like a comic or a TV series where you have an actor or you can draw it and you can have that visual there. You need to remember to articulate in the prose like this character is stimming, this character is moving their body in this certain way, this character is not making eye contact. And that can be a lot harder to do in prose than in like a visual medium if you're not paying attention to it. And I can feel like that might be some of the reason why it slips through the cracks. But in this book you do such a good job of grounding people in Faye's perspective and in her body because it's in the first person that she's tripping over things because of her, is it apraxia?
Ataxia.
Ataxia, sorry.
It's
And
okay.
she has trouble running, or she's like flopping her hands, or she's doing these things, and you're very grounded in her perspective, and you're catching all of that, so it makes the book feel very real.
Thank you.
And I know that's
I
something that I struggle with in my prose is I am always an underwriter. I always forget to add physical descriptions to everything, and my second draft is going back and adding that in. Um, but yeah, I can really see how medium would affect how you portray an autistic character if you're not thinking about it intentionally like that.
Oh, definitely. And when they are autistic coded on TV, they too tend to, at the very least, stand a little more stiffly, which is common, if not as much as I'd like to see. Um, but yeah, I think because of this, I actually focus a lot on body language and what people are doing with their hands, even when I'm not writing autistic characters. So I have to like remember, yeah, this character actually is making eye contact. This character is probably like folding their hands in their lap and not tugging on their shirt.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I always like to ask my authors a freebie question in case there's anything that I missed. Feel free to ramble about whatever you want about this book, and here, all yours.
Yeah, so this is really convenient actually because you just brought this up. I did want to mention that the book is largely about the way that she interacts with the world as an autistic kid, but she also has ataxia, which is a neurological issue affecting balance and coordination. And I included this because I do too, although for simplicity's sake, I made hers completely consistent, whereas mine is more episodic. I have poor balance all the time, but sometimes it is considerably worse. Um, but I wanted it to be obvious and clear throughout the story, so I simplified that a little bit. But I didn't hear that word until I was in my mid 20s. I grew up with vague dizzy spells that I totally inherited from my dad, but we just didn't talk about it. Like I was embarrassed, so I just tried to pretend I was fine when I was stumbling down the soccer field and stuff. And I don't want other people to have to, it's part of not hiding who you are, is hiding when you're struggling, even if it feels silly or it's, mild as in not life threatening, etc. So it was very important for me to include this, that I've never seen a character have this style of disability.
Yeah, and that can be so important for, like you said, the representation too. But if you don't know the vocabulary for it, that can be really hard to find out that there's even something wrong in the first place, or to go get it diagnosed, or to
Mm-hmm.
find resources to help if there's anything that can be that can manage it, or to help you get training to learn how to interact with the world better. I don't know how that works, but like for example, my sister has dyslexia. So like before we knew the word dyslexia or we had vocabulary for that, it was just kind of like, why are you struggling with reading so much? But after we had the vocabulary to help her with that disability, we were able to put her into specialized, training and specialized therapy, and she caught up with reading within a school year. So
Exactly.
like
Like,
having that vocabulary is really important. And so I'm really glad that you brought that up. Thank you.
mhm.
So, final question is just a simple one, but what else are you working on? You mentioned that you write a lot of science fiction, and fantasy. And where can we find you online?
All right. So, yeah, like I said, this was a big outlier for me. I do enjoy writing middle grade stuff, but I don't do it very much. My current big project that I just started my first draft is called Cracks in the Stone, and it is a steampunk high fantasy set in a kingdom where everyone is non-binary. I spent like a year coming up with a gender system that is culture specific to this kingdom. And yeah, I ramble about it a lot online in the only place I really hang out, which is Tumblr. Um, so yeah, if anyone wants to hear more about my stories or just come say hi, you can find me on Tumblr at a certain Moshke. Moshke is Moshke, and that's all one word.
Awesome. I will have links to your social media and to where you can buy your book in the description of this video, and I'll have a transcript of this on my blog, and I can include all those links there as well. But thank you so much
Wonderful.
for taking the time to talk with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. This was fantastic.